Hello and welcome to this RICS webinar to introduce our new rules of conduct. I'd like to thank everyone who's attending today. We're very glad that you're able to join us. My name's Chrissy O'Rourke. I'm Head of Conduct Standards for RICS, and I'm delighted that we're joined today by a panel of experienced chartered surveyors who are going to discuss the new rules with us. Our first panelist is Dayle Bayliss, who's a member of the working group that developed the rules of conduct. She's a Lionheart trustee and a former governing council member, and Dayle runs her own building surveying practice in the UK. Our next panelist is Danny Medcalf. Danny has significant involvement in training and supporting APC candidates and assessors. He delivers training on ethics and the rules of conduct to RICS members, both as they start their careers and also later on when they're more established. And then our final panelist today is Charlotte Neal, who joined RICS in September from the property industry, where she has extensive experience in valuation, residential and commercial property, and latterly in insolvency. Her role at RICS is as Director of Surveying Standards, and that involves working with the surveyors and professionals in the standards team to ensure that our technical standards are fit for purpose for members and their clients. Unfortunately, we were going to be joined today by Yunus Aminu from the UAE. Yunus has a personal matter, which means that he's been unable at the last moment to join us. We're sorry to be missing him, and we obviously send him our best wishes. But I think that this will be a really interesting panel today and able to cover most of the questions that we get. Obviously, if there's anything that we feel that we need to maybe contact Yunus about, we can do that and answer questions outside of the webinar format. Before we get into the discussion with the panelists, I was just going to give a short introduction to the rules in case there's anyone who maybe hasn't had much chance to look at the documents yet. We would really like attendees to ask us questions. You can do that in the questions box on your menu, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can with our panelists once we've had a short introduction and some initial thoughts from them. Abby, are you able to share the slides, please? Thanks. If you could just flick onto the first one. Abby, thank you. So the rules were developed by a working group which consisted of members, but also some regulatory professionals from different professions and some legal expertise as well. And we were supported by a global advisory group of members from a range of different backgrounds and areas of surveying, as well as different parts of the world. Once we developed the first draft of the rules, we consulted on them last year with members, firms and the public. We considered those comments, made some changes, and then they were adopted by the Standards and Regulatory Board earlier this year. When we were doing that work of developing the draft rules, we had a number of aims. We want the new rules to provide a simpler structure. So we have one document now replacing 3 previous documents. We wanted to give more clarity to members, the firms and the public about what good ethical professional conduct looks like. We also wanted to use the rules to encourage an inclusive profession where everyone can thrive, and also to respond to some of the most important challenges that we know our profession has a role in meeting, particularly the evolving use of technology in surveying, but also the importance of the expertise of our members and firms in supporting sustainable development, so addressing issues like climate change and urbanisation. Abby, could we have the next slide, please? So, as I said, the new rules of conduct is a single document. It replaces 3 documents: the existing rules of conduct for members, the rules of conduct for firms, and the global ethical principles. The rules were published on the 11th of October and they take effect from the 2nd of February 2022. So until then, the old rules continue to apply. There are 5 rules, and I've set them out on this slide so that you can see them. Those of you who are familiar, as I hope you all are, with the global ethical principles will see that there's a lot of crossover there. There's also obviously a lot of similarity with the existing rules, the principles there. And that's because the fundamental ethical principles were not broken, they remain the same. What we're intending to do is to give more detail and more examples and help to give a simpler structure. Abby, can I have the next slide, please? To help members and firms familiarise themselves with the rules, we've given a number of supporting materials. So there's some free online CPD, which you can get to through the web page that the rules of conduct are published on. On that web page, there's also a document which sets out the comments that we had during the consultation and how we decided to respond to those. So that's the document that if you responded during the consultation, you might be interested in looking at. We also have a number of scenarios. So we've looked at some common ethical issues that arise in practice and given some examples of how we think that the rules of conduct apply to those and might help with making ethical decisions there. And there's an ethics decision tree there as well, which again will help people who are trying to make decisions. And you can either Google RICS rules of conduct or whichever search engine you would like to use, or you can find them on the website under the Upholding Professional Standards tab. Governing Council also recently published a statement of values following the Levitt review. And that statement of values makes it clear that we expect staff and volunteers working for RICS to meet the same standards that we hold others to through these rules of conduct as well. So there is a connection there with staff and other people who work for RICS. Abby, could we lose the slides now, please? So that's a very brief introduction to the new rules. There's obviously a lot more information online, and I'd encourage people to go and take a look if you haven't already. But I'd like to start by just asking our panel for some initial thoughts. Dayle, maybe we could start with you. If I could ask for your reflections as a member of the working group on how the rules were developed, but also how they affect you running a small business.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. So, yeah, as Chrissy mentioned, I was a member of the working group, and I've been that since 2019 when we started the process of looking at this. And one of the reasons, so at the time I was a member of Governing Council, I'm a Lionheart trustee, but I'm also an owner of a small business, but as a micro business. And I was there to give that view of actually in principle, how these things affect the running of the business, running me as an individual, but also how do we apply them going forward. And I think one of the important parts of this, the changes, is about giving businesses the autonomy to develop processes and systems that reflect their business. So it's not overly prescriptive. And the kind of best case that I use to explain that is, for me, conflict of interest things are quite simple because it's not, most of the time the instruction comes through me, so I can do that really quickly. So I don't need a huge process to check all of that. But actually, if you're in a larger company, it's a different approach. And that's the key point of these changes. It's about behaviours and how you use them, and that, come back to that ethics decision tree. It's about giving you the flexibility to suit the practice that you're in, because we're a diverse group from a range of backgrounds and a range of different organisations, and then we have that global aspect to that. And another important point in this is that it's about ensuring that we're the gold standard of ethical behaviour, but actually understanding that in that global context, that culturally what might be acceptable in one country may not be in another, and different working practices. We still have to abide by the law, but you can't be, it comes back to that, you can't be prescriptive in what we're telling people to do, because it's trying to set that within that global context. And I think, given my experience and my background of being a member of Governing Council in 2019, it would be, you know, I think it's fair to mention the elephant in the room of the Levitt report, and kind of where that applies for code of conduct and ethical behaviour. And for me, as a member of governing council, the most important thing that I take from the Levitt review is that it was the members that were pushing for what was right, were digging kind of deep into what the business of the RICS was, and asking those questions and probing, and doing what it is that surveyors do, and uphold that ethical behaviour. So whatever the outcome of the Levitt review, it's really important that actually behaviours and doing the right thing was at the forefront, because it was members there all the time. So it's an important piece to take forward as we move into that next phase of post-Levitt and rebuilding.
Thanks, Dayle. It was really interesting and helpful. Danny, you have a lot of experience training APC candidates and assessors and auditing assessors. I wanted to ask you about the effect that the changes will have on APC candidates, but also how the rules of conduct can help people who are at the start of their career.
Sure. Okay. I mean, first things first, I'm really, really pleased that these new rules simplify what we had before. We had 9 rules for members, 15 rules for firms, a global ethical standard, 5 global ethical standards, and the rules of better regulation. Now it's all been condensed into one much simpler format. Okay. So with my role as rules of conduct trainer for members and APC and ASOC RICS candidates, also training supervisors and counsellors who are hopefully supporting the training for APC candidates. I also train the assessors as well, who assess APC candidates. And then with my APC hat on as well, chairing, assessing and dealing with APC panels and appeals, it's just so much simpler to explain it. And even the course I'm doing now, talking about the new rules, which don't obviously come in until 2022, people are sort of breathing a sigh of relief. Okay, and being blunt, the old system confuses people. Okay, so this for me is and it's all there in a single document. It's a single PDF on the website, which has in there the 5 rules, example behaviours, and importantly as well, the obligations to the RICS. Okay, at the bottom of that PDF. It's a 3-page PDF, really, really good, 3 or 4 pages, something like that. Okay, so do have a look at that. The other thing is as well, you mentioned an opportunity at the beginning of candidates' careers. Yeah, it's a really good guide for dealing with candidates, particularly global candidates, because every country has their different professional standards, their approach to dealing with ethical issues, cultural issues, things like that. So it's going to be hopefully standardizing all of that. People are working off the same hymn sheet all the time. And as you said, the ethical decision tree is always there as a fail-safe should candidates not be sure on making an ethical decision. Obviously, the surveyor has the last decision, makes the final decision on whether they can act, for example, or not. I just wanted to say one other thing to APC candidates as well, to make it absolutely clear that those who are sitting in this next month between now and Christmas will not be tested on the new rules. Okay, the testing is going to take place in the spring candidates once the new rules come in February 2022. Okay, having said that, I would expect the candidates sitting in this session to have a general awareness that there's going to be a change, obviously, because it's a really current topic. And when you look on the RSS website, lots of information there about that. So don't worry about that too much. That's really all I wanted to say. Thanks, Chrissy.
That's great. Thanks, Danny, and thanks for providing that reassurance for people who are sitting their APC at the moment, that they don't have something to go off and revise in a hurry before their assessment. Charlotte, you've just joined RICS from the property industry, and I know that you worked on client side as part of your surveying work. I was going to ask you about your thoughts about why the rules of conduct are important when you're perhaps when you are client side, when you're a client of a surveyor?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chrissy. I think for me, when I was in the client seat and I was instructing surveyors myself, it gave me the confidence that the people that I was instructing and appointing to undertake work for me would behave appropriately and with integrity, but also in carrying out their work, I knew there was going to be a high level of professionalism and that they would be skilled and competent in what they were advising me on. So it's not just about, for me as a client, it's not just about how the surveyors behave in what they deliver to me, which, you know, gives you that really high level of service, but it's also about having confidence that if they don't know about a particular subject, or they are not the right subject matter expert in a particular area, they would point me in the right direction of the person to help me. So as much as the level of service that they actually deliver, it's about knowing that they will only deliver on something that they really understand and believe in. So that's really helpful. And I think from a member point of view, also giving advice, it's about knowing how to behave. And I think linking into what Danny was saying, when you become a chartered surveyor, it's ingrained in you to behave in a certain way with a high level of integrity, behave ethically, and it becomes a way that you not only work but live as well. And it's something that is so important right from the foundations of being a surveyor throughout the whole of your career.
Thanks, Charlotte. I think that's really important, isn't it? You know, that that actually the rules of conduct support ethical decision making, which is always a process, and it's something which doesn't just apply to professional practice, although obviously it's mostly about that. But there are some elements where it can cross over into personal conduct. I mean, one of the areas where we thought very much about kind of where we should and shouldn't be intervening in sort of personal conduct when we were developing the rules of conduct was around sort of the use of social media and public statements, and that falls under the rule which is about taking responsibility and acting in the public interest, and maintaining public confidence in the profession. We ended up with a statement which was about ensuring that public statements where you could be identified as a surveyor did maintain public confidence in the profession, and that's one of the case studies that we have on the website. Is it talks about how we might apply that behaviour. Dayle, I know that a number of people who responded to the consultation were concerned that this was maybe intended to stop people being critical of RICS, which very much obviously wasn't our position, wasn't what we were aiming to do. But would you mind just sharing some thoughts on why it is that we think that social media posts should be covered by the rules of conduct?
Yeah, I think that point you made about criticism of the RICS, it's not about that. I mean, the RICS should be able to take challenge and respond to that. We know the benefits of that, but it's about as recent cases of behaviours on social media, whether they're as aggression or racism or intolerance, they're the kind of behaviours that we don't expect of a surveyor, and that's the kind of the areas that we're looking to cover. It's I think the easiest way is just when it comes back to these behaviours, is that how you're responding, and whether that's your personal life or your business life, it should be appropriate because you're acting under that banner of a professional surveyor. So it's not about we want to see a challenge. That's absolutely fine, but it's behaviours that are right. And it's a grey area, isn't it? I think you know, as social media develops, and this is one of the things again about not being really prescriptive, is that, you know, when we started looking at these, you know, we were talking about Facebook, Instagram, and it's like TikTok was in its infancy. You've now got Telegram, and the things are just evolving all the time. So it's about, yeah, a behaviour of what is your digital footprint and what people see about you.
Thanks, Dayle. If I could just encourage people who are attending, if you've got questions that you'd like us to ask the panel, please do post them in the questions box, and we'll put them forward to people and do our best to answer them. One of the other things that I know generated a lot of comment when we were in consultation, both positive and negative, was how we should use the rules of conduct to support sustainability and to support sustainable development goals. There are a number of behaviours within the rules, specifically one within Rule 3, which talks about the expectation that when they're advising clients, members and firms will encourage sustainable solutions that balance the economic, social and environmental impacts and benefits of the work that they're doing. Danny, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts. I'm sure this is something that's really important to APC candidates in particular, is that impact that the profession has on the world. Is there anything that you wanted to add about sort of sustainability, if you had any thoughts about it?
Beg your pardon, I was on mute then. A couple of things. By the way, I've just put the PDF link to the rules of conduct in and the example behaviours and things. Correction, there's 11 pages, not 3 or 4. I must have read it so quickly. Taking responsibility there. Yeah, sustainability and inclusion, diversity, and I suppose the biggest one for me is respect, because, you know, the social media issue, you can see it's so easy to disrespect and, you know, even unconsciously, without, you know, being deliberate, to, you know, affect people like that. So again, I think that's clear that it's embedded in there. I've just seen a question, by the way. Emily Hainel. Hello, Emily. How are you? What a small world. I know, Emily. Right, you're seeking your APC in spring 22. Will I be asked on both the new rules of conduct and old? Now, you will be asked about the new ones, Emily. Okay. To have an awareness of the old ones won't do you any damage, but I would say certainly we're instructing panels to work on to focus on the new ones. So you should be fairly safe with that.
That's great. Thanks, Danny. Robert's also asked if we can repeat the 3 documents that the new rules will replace. And those are the existing rules of conduct for members, the rules of conduct for firms, and the global ethical and professional standards. So those are the 3 documents which will now be replaced by the single rules of conduct. Charlotte, could I come to you and just ask about sustainability in relation to clients, and whether you think that the rules of conduct kind of will make a difference to from a client side in terms of encouraging sustainable development?
Definitely, I think so. I mean, the rules of conduct are something that creates the confidence in markets. And sustainability obviously is incredibly important. And I think, you know, ESG is such an important point that everyone is talking about in the market at the moment. I can't go through a day without having a discussion about it. And I think that the rules of conduct make surveyors forefront in terms of providing the confidence around the built environment and what that means. And it's around doing the right thing and making sure that the decisions you make around sustainability are long-term decisions and not just a quick win. It's that ethical point of view and the integrity within with which you behave when giving advice and also seeking advice around that, and the confidence that you can have in your advisors doing the right thing.
Thanks, Charlotte. And Dayle, in terms of running a small business, I know obviously one of the things we were anxious not to do was to sort of add regulatory burden, but presumably sustainability is as important to your clients as it is to maybe clients of the big firms.
Yeah, the important thing with the sustainability aspect is that it's not about every project being net zero, you know, if you're doing a new house, it's going passive house, that kind of thing. It's about having an awareness and that wider awareness around the 14 UN sustainability goals and advising clients on things they can do. It's not, you know, for clients says, look, it's not cost effective, I can't do that. You walking away going, sorry, it's against my rules, I can't act for you. It's just being there to say, okay, I understand that, but have you considered this? And it's just giving clients as much information as they can so that they can make the decisions. But it's not saying, well, unless you're going to be sustainable, I'm walking away. And when we talk about sustainability, it is, as I say, we look at the UN sustainability goals. So it is all of the ESG, you know, water, energy efficiency, people, place, the whole kind of rounded aspect of sustainability.
I think also, Dayle, that for the smaller businesses, it's actually almost more important because there's less capital available to implement strategies. So going to Dayle's point about understanding about pointing things out to your clients, but also when it's just not practical for them to put it into place, and making the decisions often for those smaller investors or clients is actually much more fundamental for them because they don't have big pots of capital, but also they don't necessarily have the big shiny buildings that are already quite sustainable. So I think it is very relevant no matter what size of business or investor you are.
Thanks both for that, that's really helpful. Alan's asked about whether ARC will be back online in the new year. Alan, I'm really sorry, that's a question that I don't know the answer to. What I can say is that, you know, we're incredibly aware of the effect that ARC being down is having on people. People within our RICS are working very hard, both on the IT side, but also in our qualifications assessment team to try to mitigate the effects of that and to try and get it back up. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer, but I just wanted to acknowledge your question and acknowledge that we do know how difficult it is for people, and I'm sorry about that. Rotendo has asked whether the rules of conduct expire or whether there'll be another redraft in the future. The last, I think the existing rules of conduct that we're replacing are over 10 years old, so this isn't something that happens often. Dayle, I don't know whether as a member of the working group you've got a sense of kind of how likely it is that we'll need to revisit these soon.
I mean, it's been, yeah, it's a while since we have revisited them. Fundamentally, the behaviours haven't changed. They've kind of just been refreshed and brought, as like Danny said, simplified and brought things together. So I can't see there being a major change in the near future, but it's good that, you know, as I talked about how social media has changed. We don't know what the next tech kind of revolution and what's on the horizon. So I think what we've got now has agility and flexibility to it, but who knows what's around the corner. But we'll just have to adapt to suit. But that's, you know, that's part of our profession, is about adapting to suit the world in which we're working in and meeting our clients and that public benefit.
Thanks, Dayle. Yanaki's asked about particularly over Christmas, firms receiving gifts from clients and contractors, and whether the rules around that have changed. Obviously, the main rules, the specific rules about gifts is in the anti-money laundering, bribery and corruption professional statement, which hasn't changed, is still valid. there is a mention in the behaviours around acting with honesty and integrity do talk specifically about making sure that you're not being improperly influenced by things like gifts. But Danny, I wonder if this must be a question that comes up often for APC candidates, you know, how to handle this, whether you've got anything you wanted to add.
Yes, it's the definition of between a gift and a bribe, and it's about proportionality really, and timing. And I'm just looking at that example behaviour, which sums it up really in Rule 1.2. Members and firms do not allow themselves to be influenced improperly by others as a result, for example, of giving or receiving work referrals, gifts, hospitality, etc. So it's one of these subjective things that really you've got to decide yourself in conjunction with your peers, your bosses, being transparent and open. And again, we've got the good old ethical decision tree should you fail to make a decision yourself. And again, it's very much one of these, but I would always be very, very cautious. Go on the cautious side. If you're not sure, say no and record the decision.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully your business would have a sort of a policy on this that will help you as well. I mean, Charlotte, presumably businesses you've worked for, this is something which where you would expect the business to have a fairly helpful policy on what to accept and what to record.
Absolutely, all the firms that I've worked for have had very clear policies on what's an acceptable level. But I think going to Danny's point, you should have a gut feel. If it feels that it's too big, then it probably is wrong. And if it's something that you yourself wouldn't give to one of your advisors, clients, whoever it may be, because you feel that it's, you know, extravagant, then again, that tells you that you should steer clear. And then it's about just being polite. And, you know, most people in this day and age understand the pressures around accepting gifts, etc., and appropriate behavior. And as long as you're nice about it, generally people are very accepting of the fact that you can't necessarily accept things.
Thanks both. The next question is from Craig, who asks about the reasoning for splitting the rules of conduct and the obligations to RICS, why those are an appendix. I mean, Dayle, my recollection, so this is really about sort of separating those things which are about your relationship with the public and clients and those things which are about your relationship with your regulator. But you'd be well placed to answer this question, I think, as well.
I think you've summed that up perfectly. Yeah, it's also about within the rules being really quite clear, but appreciated as someone. And one of the questions that is coming up about that, you know, the rules are much. So whilst we've got these overarching headings, we've got supplementary text below them. And actually, if you're being assessed, how can you know all of that? So that kind of front end is about the rules and then some behaviours that sit behind that, and then all the appendixes, the additional to help you make those decisions, because it's not about front loading all of the examples, because it gets confusing, and every time you're put in a different situation, we can't have an example for all of that, which is why we come back to that ethical tree.
I think to add to that as well, Chrissy, the fact that there are 3 obligations for members and 7 for firms really reflects the extra responsibilities that a regulated firm has. Obviously, complaints handling, PII, obviously members need PII possibly as well, but handling clients' money, those sorts of things. You know, it's really, I suppose, the link between the 9 rule for members and the 15 for firms. There are just more obligations from firms.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Question from Amandif about something very important. How does RICS ensure that diversity and inclusion in firms, especially during recruitment processes? And Charlotte, I obviously encouraging diversity and inclusion is something that is a really important kind of new emphasis and focus, although it's, you know, it's been there in the respect principle in the global rules of conduct, global ethical principles for a while. But maybe do you feel happy to kind of take a first go at answering this question?
Sure. Well, I mean, talking about my own experience, I think there's no getting away from the fact that historically it's not been a very diverse industry, whether that's gender balance or whether that's racially diverse. When I was a graduate, I was one of the only girls on my course at university. In fact, I think I was the only girl on my course who actually graduated. Out of something like 90 people. So, you know, immediately you've got an imbalance just by the fact that there aren't enough people coming through. I think this is something that's been really, really important. And when I was a graduate, there were very few female role models for me to sort of speak to, look up to, etc. And those that were around were extremely short of time because everyone was interested in speaking to them and trying to get sort of mentorship and guidance from them. I'm really pleased to say that in the organisations I've been working for over the last couple of decades since I qualified, it's changing, and it's changing a lot. There's still more to be done, obviously, and I think the rules of conduct are asking the firms and the members to consider what they are doing when they are recruiting, but also, I mean, just looking at the practical side of things here at RICS, we look at our working groups and our expert panels very carefully to try and make sure that we do get balance and we do get good diversity, because different takes on things can only be a good thing to give us a more rounded approach to the work that we're undertaking. And I think in certainly our educational programs, we're reaching out to schools, we're going in to try and encourage people to both understand what we do, but also understand that there is a pathway for them to become surveyors. And personally, I think that as a member as well, it's really important that we fly the flag for the industry and that we, you know, encourage people that we come across in everyday life. For example, I have children, and I'm sure their school is fed up with me telling them about the built environment and being a surveyor, but that's how they hear real life stories and get enthused to be part of our industry, which is absolutely crucial, because those people that we bring through will be our future leaders, and so it's absolutely essential that they are diverse.
I think RICS is also, you know, I think we all accept that we've got a way to go, but we definitely see a role for ourselves in amplifying those voices of you know, with diverse experience across the profession, and making sure that those people are visible, as you say, Charlotte, to, you know, to help encourage people coming through, but also to so that firms, you know, can see the benefits of having that diversity within the talent that they employ.
Absolutely.
Keith asks whether we've lost the obligation on firms to support employees in CPD. I think it's in Behaviour 2.5, Keith, which says firms encourage and support directors, partners and employees to maintain and develop their knowledge and skills and check they're complying with CPD requirements set by RICS. So hopefully that covers it for you. I mean, certainly it would be there in the overarching rule, which is about ensuring that work is done by competent individuals. That's an expectation on firms, and obviously CPD is part of that maintaining competence. So I think if you had a firm that wasn't supporting employees, they, you know, there would be questions about whether they were complying with that rule. Jamie asks whether, given the contentious nature of the climate change debate, there's a risk that RICS could cause further damage to their relationship with current RICS members. I'm assuming Jamie means by sort of focus, by having expectations around sort of advice on sustainability. Dayle, would it be all right if I asked you for your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, and apologies if I've got the take on this question wrong. So if I have, just come back in the chat with with the question again, but it comes back to this point about it's not having a your sustainable or not approach. It's about us as individuals, us as firms, to have an awareness of sustainability. And I come back to sustainability is that wider kind of broad church of UN sustainability goals, and using that as part of our arsenal as professionals to advise our clients on the best outcomes. So it's not a kind of a die-hard position that if you're not sustainable in your decisions, dismiss that because of cost or whatever that may be. It's just being robust in how we advise clients. And actually, in order to be successful in our profession, we need to have an awareness of it, because it's something that is hugely pressing. It's whether you're acting for a large firm that's got pension decisions sitting behind it. There's things that are in the conscience of everyone, and we've all got to work businesses towards net zero, and that's different targets for different countries. So it's something that you've got to be aware of. So as a member, it's not the RICS saying do this or you're in breach of regulations and you're out. It's about having the awareness and advising clients appropriately.
Thanks, Dayle. I mean, I think that we all recognise that there's a range of views, across our RICS members, as there are across society, in relation to climate change. But I know that there's a lot of work being done by colleagues, both in terms of the specific technical standards that support recording, measuring good decision making around climate change and carbon measurement and that sort of thing, but also thought leadership in terms of support out there for members and firms who are being looked to by their clients for advice and help in this area. So I hope that what we're doing is leading with kind of evidence and experience from our membership to support people dealing with those challenges.
I'll just come back on that point and just to kind of elaborate on that is whatever your views on the climate crisis, you can't ignore that the cost of energy is increasing, and we work in the built environment. It's a major factor. So even just being able to advise clients on how to make your building more efficient, it's not about just the carbon offsetting, it's the energy it uses and the way that people use those space. So it's unfortunately, sustainability is part of every decision we make, and sometimes it's a really kind of minor part that's just part of your, it's a subconscious of your decision, or sometimes it's a huge part and there's all the calculations and supporting evidence that goes behind it. But again, it comes back to that. It's proportionate depending on project, client, and what you're doing on your day-to-day work.
Thanks, Dayle. Stephen's asking, with the introduction of the new rules of conduct, how is this being addressed with the SLA, service level agreement, I presume we as surveyors receive from RICS? So obviously I mentioned earlier the statement of values which Governing Council has published, which makes it clear that we expect to hold staff and others who represent work for RICS to the same sort of standards that we expect from others. We know, of course, as well that there's the independent review, which is due to start into the purpose and strategy of RICS, which will look very specifically, we know from defining our future at that relationship at what value we provide to members. Charlotte, I don't want to sort of put you on the spot, but I didn't know if there's anything that you wanted to add about that from the point of view of sort of RICS staff.
Well, I mean, obviously the RICS staff are expected to behave in a way in line with the code of the rules of conduct. And as a new person joining RICS, I certainly haven't seen anything that would suggest that is not the case. And I think we work very hard here to make sure that we are setting the standards and hopefully leading by example. And and certainly that goes to my team who are responsible for the standards. And in everything that we're doing and looking at the guidance and the standards that we're putting out there, we consider all these things very carefully before they are in a position that they get published.
Thanks, Charlotte. Danny, I think the next question is one for you. Keith was saying, are we expecting candidates at APC to know all of the behaviours verbatim? I mean, I would assume the answer to that is no, because I don't think the APC is intended just to be a memory test. It's about understanding, but you'd be much better placed to answer that than me.
Absolutely correct. Great question, Keith. I saw the question. I remember when I first started assessing many years ago, I had a chair and he insisted that the candidate name the 9 members and the 15 firms rules and the global ethical standards and the rules of better regulation. It took him about 10 minutes to do that. And you know what? We're getting away from that. We're more interested in principles, the principles behind the 5 rules. So an abridged version for me would be good for a candidate to do, okay? And then a good assessment panel will be digging out some experience examples and even some advice that they have given, perhaps decision they've made on a conflict of interest or an ethical decision. So you're right, we're going far more away from that, the level 1 knowledge of them, more about the application and how, you know, those behaviours are actioned and delivered.
Brilliant, thanks, Danny. Simon, you've asked whether the new rules touch on the subject of unconscious bias. The answer is that they do. So obviously the rules themselves, Rule 4 says that members and firms must encourage diversity and inclusion, and there's a specific behaviour 4.7 which says members and firms develop an inclusive culture in their workplaces, support equal access and opportunity for all, and identify and address unconscious bias. So we have specifically asked firms to think about that and how that affects their inclusivity and what they can do to address unconscious bias.
I think just on that point, Chrissy, as well, certainly I'm aware of a lot of the advisory firms having sort of modules and courses around unconscious bias and trying to encourage people to just check themselves to make sure that that isn't coming into their decision-making process.
Thanks, Charlotte. Mark's asking a question about the behaviour in Rule 4, which says firms check that supply chains do not involve modern slavery or other abuses of the workforce. And how far back in the supply chain should small firms check? I mean, I think that my starting point for this, and Dayle, I'm going to ask if you've got any thoughts in a second, is that in the introduction to the rules of conduct, what we say is that in relation to all of the behaviours, we expect firms and members to do what's reasonably possible. So I think that's the short answer to the question. But Dayle, I know that this was something that was discussed quite a lot when we were developing the rules. You know, how far we should go in these sorts of behaviours.
Yeah, and it's proportionality. So personally, if I've got a tender out there, I ask the question of those that are the main contractor returning their tender, but I don't have control over their supply chain. I have some degree of control, but I don't have ultimate control. So we just say we expect you to pass that on, and for me, that is reasonable for the size and type of project. It came up in a discussion the other day. I'm a non-exec director for a housing association, and we talk about conflicts of interest and things, and so lots of us will have pensions, or there'll be a pension company that sits behind another organisation, and they will have investments, and that will be in a multitude of different companies, and we have no say over that, and it's very difficult for us to check that entire supply chain. So kind of that far back, for me, feels that's not proportionate and that's not reasonable, but it's about what kind of levels of control do you have and influence within that supply chain, and doing your best to check that.
Yeah, I think it's very much about keeping your eyes open, isn't it? You know, not simply ignoring the fact that we know that there are issues around modern slavery and you know, abusive practices in some parts of the world and in, I mean, in the UK in the construction industry and you know, being aware of that and keeping your eyes open to it rather than, you know, expecting you know, people to take extreme measures.
And it's very similar to, say, health and safety in the UK, is that you discharge your duties, you check the paperwork there, but if you go on site and you see something, you don't turn a blind eye, you raise that in the appropriate way and escalate it, and you would be expected to do the same. So if you witness something, you take action, but prior to that, you do your best endeavours to do the checks and that you can.
Thanks, Dayle. Ossian, or it may be Ossian, sorry, I apologise if I'm mispronouncing your name, is sitting at APC in January this year, having been pushed back from an autumn sitting, and wants to know which rules he'll need to know. I mean, my understanding is that in January it will still be the old ones, but Danny, are you able to confirm that?
It is. Sorry to hear you've been pushed back, Ozian. We did try and get everything done by Christmas. We haven't been able to for various reasons. So, but you're still effectively the autumn sitting, even though you're in January. Okay. But yes, you will be assessed on the current rules. Okay. The new ones come in February. But as I said earlier, be aware of the principles of the new rules, why they've changed, and some of the headlines.
Thanks, Danny, and good luck. I hope it
Yeah.
goes well in January. Let's see what we have next. So Charles is asking whether the new rules were driven by sustainability. Dayle, I think that was one of the drivers, but certainly not the only one. But maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, I think it was a very key driver, but it talks, I keep repeating the same thing, it talks about these UN sustainability goals because that covers diversity, it covers people, place, so much wider context of sustainability. So for poor Chrissy, that would have been one of the things that I kind of harped on about all the time, about, you know, how do we ensure it's the wider communities and places that we work in, and how do we influence that. And you know, when you want to talk about that diversity and inclusion, it's important to address that because it's what makes a business better, it makes it more productive, it makes, you know, come back to this point we opened in about challenge, it brings challenge from different perspectives and understanding. So, you know, embracing that wider sustainability context is what's going to make our profession and our businesses kind of the exemplar of the built environment.
Thanks, Dayle. Ross is asking, where would you find real life examples of surveyors falling foul of the rules of conduct and result in disciplinary sanctions to assist with lessons learned? Ross, those are available on the website. If you go through upholding professional standards to, I think it's how we regulate, and then there's an option for disciplinary process, I think, and that will take you to disciplinary decisions. What I would say is that obviously that's the very blunt end of what we do to support good professional practice. Luckily, you know, very few cases reach the stage of needing disciplinary sanctions, although we do publish those obviously to help people to understand where things have gone badly wrong. You may also find the scenarios really helpful because those again are drawn from real life examples of the kinds of things which either we get contacted about and members ask about, or perhaps things which we come across in complaints as well. But obviously a lot of what we do in the regulation team in relation to complaints where things have gone wrong is give advice and work with people to help them to understand what they could have done differently rather than use sanctions. So be aware that the sanctions really are the kind of you know, a very small proportion of the most serious kind of things that can go wrong, but that's where they are on the website if you'd like to take a look. Preeti is asking whether there'll be a measure to ensure that these new rules are being met by companies, and whether any data will be shared to support collaborative working across the industry, in particular in relation to D&I. I think that's a really good question, Preeti, to which I think the answer is I think that this will probably be something which is picked up as part of the purpose strategy review, and we'll be looking at some of the things that we can do to provide more advice, provide more collaboration between different firms to support them in kind of meeting those expectations. And there are some areas of the rules of conduct that we proactively monitor, particularly around things like client money protection, valuer registration, because they're so publicly tied up to the reputation of the profession. But I'm sure that there are things that we could do. I don't know whether any of the other panelists had a view on that, or whether that's covered that. But it's a really good question, Preeti. I think that's something that we'll definitely think more about in the future. Question from Marion. The rules apply to members, but how do the rules apply to RICS itself as an organisation, and what is it doing to meet the UN SDGs? So the rules of conduct don't apply. So RICS is not a regulated firm of itself, but obviously through the statement of values, we've tied RICS, or we're very clear that RICS should be meeting the same standards that are in the rules of conduct. In terms of what it's doing to meet the UN SDGs, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work on both through thought leadership, but also through the standards programme to support members in meeting the UN SDGs. There's also, I know as an organisation, we've done a lot of work on how we procure services, on our own energy efficiency, and my understanding is that there's work going on to make sure that that's published. I don't know whether any of the other panelists again had anything that they'd want to add on that, or whether that's covered it. So Claire, so Charlotte mentioned discussing something every day. She thought it might be BSG relating to sustainability. What is this, please? Charlotte, I think that's probably ESG, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is environmental, social governance. Yeah. So those are the kind of three pillars of what a policy relating to sustainability will cover, is my understanding. So hopefully that's helpful, Claire. So Simon is asking why conflict avoidance is assessed as a separate core competency by RICS. He thinks it should form part of the RICS Code of Conduct regulations, in his view. And Simon's an APC chair and auditor. Danny, do you have a view on that as a fellow APC chair and auditor?
How did I know you were going to come to me? Hello, Simon. Great question. I think it's probably because it's such a litigious and difficult area. I mean, if you look at the construction candidates, with my sort of own hat on, you know, it's a big area when you're dealing with contract administration and just dealing with client issues. So I think the answer is it's because it is such a complicated area. I think you're right. There could be an argument for forming part of the code of conduct. Again, perhaps that's, I think, for the future thing we should think more about. But you're right. It's you know, it's something we need to think about. But I think that's the reason. Yeah, it's just a sort of sensitive and difficult area. Really good question.
Thanks, Danny. We have come to 3 o'clock. I would just like to reassure John, who asked the question, that I don't think you have to stop giving boxes of chocolates to people that you work with. Again, it's about proportionality, and you know, a small gift to express a relationship is not the same as something which is intended to kind of give you an unfair advantage. But I'm aware that there's some questions we haven't got to. What we're going to try and do is we will publish the recording of this webinar on the website, and we will try to at the same time give answers to any questions that we haven't given in writing. So thank you so much for your questions. It's been really useful. There've been some really great questions there. I'm sorry to the people whose questions we didn't get to, but I hope you found it useful. As I say, we do have another webinar in January if you feel that there were more questions that you would have liked to ask, or obviously you can contact me directly. If you email standards@rics.org, that will reach me if you've got a question that you'd like me to answer. I'd just like to thank all of our panelists. Again, it's been really helpful to have your thoughts and your perspective this afternoon. So thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who attended, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.